Good morning, Kalimera. How many people stayed up too late last night? How many people went to bed disappointed last night? Now we know what you were doing last night. I found this interesting story on the internet the other day that I want to share with you. A young man told a priest, "Father, I will not come to church again." The priest asked him, "What is the reason?" The young man replied to him, "Here I see one woman gossiping with another. The person next to me is sleeping. Another one can't say the Lord's Prayer right, and the chanters are fighting sometimes." This is not at St. John's. They don't fight. At the time of service, someone else is dealing with their phone, not to mention their selfish behavior when they leave the church. The priest says to him, "You're right. But before you finally leave the church, please do me a favor. Take this oil candle and circle the church 3 times without spilling a single drop of oil. Then you can leave." "Only that I have to do," says the young man. "Okay." He walks around the church 3 times as requested by the priest. After he's done, he says, "Father, I did it." The priest asks him, "When you walked around the church, did you notice anyone gossiping anymore?" "No," he answers. "Did you see someone dealing with their phone?" "No," again he answers. "Do you know why?" the priest asks. "You were focused on the candle so you wouldn't spill the oil." So that's how it is supposed to be in our lives. When our hearts gather in Christ, we don't have time to look at other people's mistakes, whether we're in the church or outside of it. In the gospel lesson today, Jesus began his ministry by calling the first disciples. And the first place he decided to go was not the rabbinical school to get those that were well educated in the scriptures. He decided to go to the dock and find some simple fishermen. In fact, the fishermen were so simple, they did not know how to read and write. And we know this. Yesterday we celebrated the feast day of one of these fishermen, John the theologian. And we know that John is one of 3 saints that has the title theologian, meaning that he articulated the gospel better than anybody else who's ever lived. And we know that he wrote the Gospel of John and the book of Revelation and the 3 epistles ascribed to his name. And we know that he did it with help, because you can tell when you read it, in the first person plural, it uses the word we a lot. If your person's writing by themselves, they just use the word I. We are doing this. We are bearing witness, as if more than one person's saying it, because we know that he had a scribe that was writing all these things for him. So Jesus did not go and does not go looking for perfect people to be his disciples. He goes to the common people, to the sinful people, really to any people. And he calls us to follow him. He calls us to look at that light in the candle, the light of Christ that illumines all people, the light of Christ that brings a sense of peace during a time of calamity, the light that brings a sense of brightness in places where it's dark, a light that brings love in places where there is not love. I was talking to someone the other day, as happens periodically, who said to me, "I don't get anything out of going to church. I just kind of stare at the 4 walls and wait for the time to pass." And I said to them, "How often do you pray for our country?" And they said, I don't. "How often do you pray for your parents?" "I don't really do it that often." "How often do you pray for people who are traveling?" "I never do that." "How often do you pray for people who are sick?" Once in a while." "How often do you pray for your own sins?" "I don't know, when I think about it." "How often do you think about your own death?" "I never do that." I'm like, all these themes are actually captured in the divine liturgy. So when you come to church and you're wondering, how do I pass the time, besides staring at the 4 walls, even if you're not engaged in the active words of the service, have your thoughts on things you should be thinking about. We should think at least once a week about our country. We should think about people who are sick. We should think about people who are traveling. We should think about our own sins, and we should think about our own death. We should think about all these things. And it's like, if nothing else, the liturgy's on the calendar for us every Sunday morning. Like, this is on the calendar, so at least once a week, I'm doing this thing. One of the things I'm supposed to be doing as your priest is praying for all of you. I should be praying for all of you. And I pray for you when you come to my office. I pray for you when I know you're sick. I pray for you when there's a crisis. But what about when none of these things are happening? I wear this stole around my head, and I'm supposed to carry the burdens of the community. So during this pandemic, I put the Paraklesis service on Wednesday nights, and so it's on my calendar. At least once a week, I'm coming in here, and I'm praying for all of you by name. I should be doing that more often. But at least I assure on my calendar it happens once a week. So by coming to church, you assure on your calendar at least once a week, you're giving yourself an opportunity to pray for all these things that we should be thinking about more often. Jesus says to these simple men that he calls to be his disciples, "Come and I will make you fishers of men." That is something that he says to all of us. Every one of us who was baptized had the same gospel read over you. Every one of you who baptized your children had the same gospel read over them. Go out into the world and baptize all nations, teaching them to do all that I've commanded you. This was not read over the young man that would one day go to the seminary and be a priest, or the young woman who's going to one day be a Sunday school teacher. It's read over every person who's ever baptized. And so we have to ask ourselves, what am I doing to advance the message of the gospel? And if we're a parent, what is my child doing to advance the message of the gospel? And if it's nothing, you ask yourself, or nothing yet, ask yourself, what am I doing to prepare myself to do that? What am I doing to prepare my children to do that? Because we can't give the gospel to anybody if we don't have an understanding of it ourselves. The epistle lesson from 2 Corinthians, this is so apropos that these readings happen in the time that they're happening. St. Paul talks about having endurance in afflictions, hardships, calamities, COVID-19. This is why we still read the epistles 2,000 years later, because they apply to us the same today as they do then. The calamity back then might have been persecution, or it might have just been hunger, or lack of air conditioning, or lack of education. And today we have a calamity, and it's making a calamity of our society in every corner of it. Christ tells us to endure, that the gospel is what helps us to endure whatever calamity is going to come our way. And St. Paul, in these very ironic verses at the end of the epistle, talks about having nothing and yet possessing everything. Because the person who has faith can be in the midst of the biggest calamity and still have a sense of peace and hope and purpose. That's what faith does for us. And you can have everything, and there are many people started 2020 with a good sense of, I have everything, and a calamity comes and all of a sudden they feel like they have nothing. Maybe literally they have nothing. They've lost their business, or they've lost their sense of peace because they are lacking the one thing that brings peace even in the time of calamity, which is our faith. And finally, St. Paul uses this verse, "Behold, now is the acceptable time. Behold, now is the day of salvation," as a way to tell us if our life isn't in gear as much as it should be in any way, in a personal way, in a friendship way, in a relationship way, in a spiritual way, if our life is a calamity in any way, now is a good time. Now is an acceptable time. Now is a day to advance whatever we're doing toward our salvation. We don't have to be on probation for a while if we've been away from things or we're not doing things right. There's no waiting period to come back in. Now is an acceptable time. Now is a great day to start doing this. I'm so glad to see many people in church. I'm so glad when I look at the sign-up genius before when I would offer the gifts and prepare communion during the Orthros, I would pray for as many people as I could fit into that time. And most of the time I would pray in generalities for our parish leadership and our Sunday school teachers. Now, because I know exactly who's coming, I can pray for you exactly by name. Everybody who's in church today, I've said your name in prayer. And that's one of the benefits of this calamity that we're in, try to see the good in things. But I'm so glad that you're here, and I'm so glad those who join us online from various places in our community and far beyond it. I'm so glad that you're here today, and I pray that we'll use this time to think about our salvation and all the important things that relate to it. Please stand.